Welcome to our sneak peek program. My name is Jane Lavino and I am the Sugden Chief Curator of Education here at the museum. And the Education Department puts together these programs always the day before a new exhibit opens to the public. And we find that people enjoy having a sneak peek, of course, but also hearing from the experts. And we are going to hear from two of our curators today. As you can see from where you stand, we have pieces by Andy Warhol on your right-hand side as you look down the
Left way.
I'm sorry, I said it opposite. Andy Warhol on the left-hand side as you look down the hallway, and Ai Weiwei on your right-hand side as you look down the hallway. So two artistic greats of the 20th century and the 21st century hanging opposite each other. The Warhol images are part of our permanent collection, and the Ai Weiwei pieces are on loan to us for the exhibit, which will remain up through October 3rd. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yes. So it opens officially tomorrow, stays up through October 3rd. We're very generous, are grateful to our generous sponsors, some of whom I think might be with us here today, and they are Lynn and Jack Fritz, Peggy Rose Schneider Endowment Fund, Pat Wilson, Marianne Cree, Penny and Jeff Gilbert, Lachlan Hardy, Jackson Hole Traveler, Carol and James Linton, Mary Jane Hunt and Bernard Little, McRae Foundation, and Gallatin Wealth Management. Wow. Thank you to all of those people for making this possible. So the exhibit begins right where you're standing at this end of the King Gallery, and it spans, of course, the entire length all the way down. You see the Andy Warhol rhino at the end. That is the end of this exhibition. We also have activity in the museum classroom at the end of this hallway on your left, which we'll point out to you when we get down there, Lego building activity for families. But our special guests today are Dr. Tammy Hanawalt on my left, and Lisa Simmons, which is here somewhere. There she is. Hi, Lisa. Lisa is our Associate Curator of Art. And together, Tammy and Lisa are going to give you an overview of how this exhibit came together, how we acquired the art, of course, in the case of the Warhols, and how the two artists are similar in many ways. Once you start thinking about it, and once they start telling us about it, you'll say, oh yeah, they are pretty similar. As always, after our sneak peek program, if you want to join for lunch, the program lasts about 30 minutes, and then the restaurant palette is open, and they offer a special 10% off if you identify yourself as a sneak peek program attendee. So take advantage of that if you would like. Tammy, I'm going to hand it over to you to start the program.
Thank you, Jane. So good to see faces of live people so close again. This is wonderful. Well, we began talking about this exhibit actually quite a few years ago, probably when I first came here. Adam Harris, I'm sure many of you know, we were talking about how great it was. I was an intern when they had when the museum had the bronze heads by Ai Weiwei outside on the sculpture trail. I think a lot of you will remember how dramatic that looked and what a great backdrop. In fact, I think we're still, when they talk about Ai Weiwei and those bronze heads, a lot of times the pictures with our backdrop is included in those pictures. So that is really important, how the relationship with Ai Weiwei started with the museum. And Adam and I were talking about that, and as I said, when I said what a great summer that was, and he said, I think I've seen those in Legos. I go, I know, I've seen that too. And I got really excited about the idea that we might be able to bring these here in the Lego versions. And then Adam said, well, what about if we put those with the Ai Weiwei? I thought, this is a great idea, and we can put it with Valued Species, the other exhibit that we have this summer, and it would be a really cool combination of exhibits. So when I was putting this together, I was looking at both Andy Warhol and Ai Weiwei. Andy Warhol, of course, influenced Ai Weiwei greatly. It was said I was told first that someone said that he studied under Andy Warhol. I'm like, that doesn't quite work because I think Andy Warhol died in 1988. Ai Weiwei was in New York in the 90s. They did meet each other. They did meet each other when I believe Ai Weiwei was in school in New York. You can see obviously a lot of correlation between the two. So I'm putting this together and I'm thinking, what is it that both artists are talking about? These are two very different narratives, and what is it that it's thinking about? So Andy Warhol's talking about, he changed everything in art when he went away from modernism and started looking at consumerist culture and how we value art, right, in a different way than the modernists were doing in, say, the mid-20th century. So he's talking about valued art, and he does this endangered species, this series here of endangered species, to talk about how we value animals, to bring animals that are becoming extinct to the forefront in the 1980s. So in 1983, he does this series. This is a whole other narrative on this side about why Ai Weiwei is using wildlife in his artwork. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the endangered species series, how we got this in our permanent collection, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Ai Weiwei. So Andy Warhol was, of course, a famous artist when he decided to buy some land on Mantuk Island, or Mantuk Peninsula off of the top of Long Island. Some of you might have heard of this. This was a place where a lot of celebrities bought property in the 1970s, and apparently there was a lot of parties going on there. Andy Warhol used to have the Rolling Stones play, they were playing out in his backyard sometimes. So his idea of looking at consumerist culture, like the Campbell soup cans, who many of you might have seen at MoMA, or in different places they've traveled. But that was a real eye-opening thing about how artists use ready-mades and how they implement consumerist culture in art. How do we value that? And then he started doing this series with, he did Marilyn Monroe, and he did the celebrities, right? And so looking at how we view celebrities, making them sort of divine beings, and he wanted to do that in his artwork. He also wanted to take a look of loss of identity in that artwork. So he presents these animals with the help of a friend of his, a gallery owner named Fieldman, who said, hey, you like conservation, you like animals, we know this, so why don't you pick out, and he chose the 10 animals that he was going to do. And I say 10, we have 11, because this one was done in 1985. I'll get to that in just a second. But he chose these 10 animals, the rhino, the black rhino at the end, that were becoming endangered in the late 70s, 80s. So this is a time when conservation is really ramping up, again, in the United States for sure. This piece here, we added, we got these pieces in 2006 after a previous exhibit that had come from the Andy Warhol Museum that was shown in another area of the museum. Jane remembers when it was here from the Andy Warhol Museum, so well received. The curator said, well, maybe we could get our own, and brought it to the collections committee, said maybe we can get our own series. So they found a private collector who was willing to part with a complete series, and they took it to Collector's Circle. Some of you may be familiar with that, but that's an acquisitions event that we have every year that is done through membership, and we have a certain amount of money to spend. And they got this set from the private collector. It was chosen as just the one piece that they were going to get that year, or the one series. They got those in 2006. So they came to the museum, and then this one was a little later. And does it say the date on there that we got them?
Is it 2008?
2008 we got this piece. This piece what Andy Warhol did for a movie actually called The Turtle Diaries, which was about saving sea turtles. And it's an actual movie. You can look it up and watch it on YouTube. And this was the poster for that, well, this image was the poster for that event. So we got it to add to our series, so we have 11 instead of 10. To remember where I was at. So Andy Warhol, looking at animals, looking at them like celebrities. I want to turn this over for just a second to Lisa. When we were working on developing this exhibit, I thought it would be a great idea to really see, well, we're in 2021 now, and see if Andy Warhol, his idea of bringing these animals to the forefront, to maybe get some attention drawn back to them so something is done before it's too late, before we lose these species forever. And so Lisa went on a deep search to see how the endangered species have either come about. Hopefully we didn't lose anybody completely, but I thought this was an interesting information to connect to these pieces. You want to fill them in on what the status is today, as of today?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So just for your information, as you walk down to the end of the gallery on the left, there's a label that outlines this visually, but just a quick overview. So 3 of the species in his series have been taken off the endangered species list for different reasons. One of them is the bald eagle. In 1973, when the Endangered Species Act was passed, it was a bipartisan act of Congress. There were fewer than 500 mating pairs of eagles remaining in the U.S. And that has since raised significantly. I think now they're around 80,000. So the bald eagle is a success story, our national emblem. And DDT pesticide use and and killing of eagles. People thought they were preying on livestock and domestic animals as well. So they were being shot, they were being poisoned, their habitat was being destroyed. So since they've been put on the endangered species list, they've made a huge comeback. So this is a wonderful success story. We don't have many of those, unfortunately, but the bald eagle is one. The other is a Pine Barrens tree frog. Now the Pine Barrens is about a 1-hour drive from Montauk, where Warhol owned the property and land. So it is possible that he saw a Pine Barrens tree frog in the wild. It was listed on the under the Endangered Species Act, but then some years later they discovered a subpopulation in Florida. So that increased the overall population, and then they took it off the list. The last one is the panda bear. So Chinese conservationists have worked very hard to conserve this species, and so their population has increased.
What was that again?
Excuse me? Panda.
The one you just...
Panda bear.
Panda? Oh.
Yeah, panda. Giant panda. So that is another success story. Now the panda is still, the population is still under threat from different areas, but in general it's stable. So those are 3 that are off the list, which is wonderful. Unfortunately, there are others who have gone from endangered to critically endangered. So there are different levels within that scale. And some of those are the orangutan. There are actually 3 species of that animal. All are critically endangered, and there are others. So they fluctuate along the endangered species list in different ways. That's interesting to note. And just for your information, what does it mean when a species is endangered, and how does it become listed as endangered? Private and public entities can petition for an animal to be put on the endangered species list, and there are different reasons for petitioning: threatened destruction of habitat, human overuse of the animal, which can cover many things, disease, predation. Existing regulations just aren't working to help those animals, or other natural or man-made factors affecting its survival. So once it's on the list, then a lot of research is done by scientists, and then it is, after that, officially declared endangered. So there's a system in place for that. And it's interesting to note that Warhol may have seen some of these animals in the wild. The peninsular desert bighorn sheep is endangered. and that's exists in Southern California, where he spent time. You may have seen the Pine Barrens tree frog, and there are eagles that nested on Montauk when he had his house there. So he may have seen some of them himself in their natural
Does the
habitats.
Department of Interior handle the endangered species?
I think it's the Fish and Wildlife.
Game and fish, or
Fish and Wildlife Service.
depending on what state you're in.
Yeah.
Fish
Yeah.
and Wildlife is part of the Department of the Interior.
Department of the Interior, so yes, thank you. And Warhol did say, he did connect very deeply to wildlife, as Tammy said. And he said, the best work of art you can make is to have land and not, quote, spoil it. So he did care deeply about conservation and animals and had 25 cats, all named Sam, so.
Yeah, and an interesting other connection between the artists is Ai Weiwei also loves cats, and he has 41 in one of his studios as part of the rescue effort. And Andy Warhol, or not Andy Warhol, Ai Weiwei, I remember watching his movie the year that the pieces were on the sculpture trail, and he was talking about his cat, and he said, one thing I learned about my cat is when the cat learned to open doors, and he said, once he went through the door, he didn't close it behind him. So a good lesson to learn from a cat.
Can I just, in terms of that question about which agency lists a species as endangered, it is actually a federal, it's a federal government listing. And so then each individual state has a listing as well. But what supersedes all is the federal government. And so just be aware of that. And so what's happening is that there's species that are listed in the United States, and then there's an international group that lists species that are in other parts of the world. So,
Well, and I'm sure Andy Warhol, because of his concern for conservation, was thinking that here in 2021, would we be looking at these again? I mean, he probably didn't know that, but looking at these again and thinking about how these animals, what their status is. So it's still impactful today. We still can change things, even though the only three of these species that are here have really risen. Maybe there's still something we can do. So, turning to Ai Weiwei, this is an entirely different narrative. This has to do with nationalism. This has to do with history. This has to do with greed. All of these pieces can be pointed back to a specific artwork that was created in the Qing Dynasty. There was a garden that the Qinlong Emperor had, or was it? Yeah, that was right? This garden was developed by Italian and French Jesuits, and designed in that garden was a group of sculptures, heads that were fountains. And that's where the original idea for the zodiac heads came along, because these were based on the Chinese zodiac. All of the animals, and we'll talk a little bit about the order and why we put them in this order. But these pieces that Ai Weiwei did don't really have to do so much with the Chinese zodiac as they have to do with this artwork and how we value artwork, how we value our stories, our histories, and who owns the stories, the histories, and the art. These pieces, the original pieces I should say, were looted from the garden when they were invaded by European forces back in the 18th century. And the pieces that were in a European-styled garden under a dynasty that was the last dynasty in China, you have to think about these artworks and being returned to China. Do they belong to China? They were taken from the gardens, but who's the owner? That's always been in question. I think 7 of the original pieces have been returned. So Ai Weiwei first did these pieces in bronze. He also did a set in gold. The bronze ones we had out on the sculpture trail were probably similar, or as similar as Ai Weiwei could get in the design to the original pieces. He did see the ones that have been returned or the ones he knew about. There was also a designer, was it Yves Saint Laurent? Yves Saint Laurent had a piece. It was put up to auction posthumously after his death, of course, and the Chinese government said it should be returned, it should be acquisitioned back to them, it should be deaccessioned from this private collection. So a Chinese businessman bought the piece, or said he was going to buy the piece at an auction, and never paid for it. Eventually, the pieces were that piece was returned to China. So now those 7 pieces are, as far as I know from any research that we did, they are back in China. Still 5 missing. So Ai Weiwei added another level after he did the bronze heads and the gold heads. He, in 2000, probably around 2006 or 7, he started to do Lego artwork because he had a 6-year-old son, and the 6-year-old son was playing with Legos, and he thought, this is a great idea. Talk about consumerism, talk about Andy Warhol, talk about a consumerist product, right? So he makes these Legos, and the first set he makes are political dissidents from, I think it was the first set was from, or the first few were from Alcatraz. So people who had been political prisoners. His father was a political prisoner in China. He had been a poet and was arrested for his artwork. Andy Warhol's been under house arrest in China. In fact, when we had the Zodiac Lego heads, or Zodiac heads up on the sculpture trail, he could not leave China because he was under political arrest. He's since moved to a lot of places, and I found this near my desk this morning. He's living in Portugal now. He doesn't reside in China anymore. So he's had trouble with the Chinese government. In fact, one of his pieces is where he is flipping off Tiananmen Square and Mao Zedong. That's one of his biggest pieces. But again, Ai Weiwei in China changed everything, just like Warhol did. Here with art history, this changes everything too. So the Lego thing began, as I said, in like 2006 or 7, and then he did this whole set of the heads. So he's doing political dissidence. That's where I was going with this. That the Legos said, you can't do any more pieces about political subjects with our Legos, and they quit selling to him. They wouldn't sell to him. So, thanks to social media, hashtag send Ai Weiwei Legos. A whole bunch of people sent Legos from all over the world so that he could continue doing his series. He's done some really important portraits in Lego. One being some students from Mexico who had been murdered in a political situation. So he decides and works with Larry Walsh, who we got these pieces from in New York, a gallery owner that we also did on loan the bronze heads, and he does these in Legos. We have the smaller set here today, which are 45 by 45. He also does a set that's 70 by 70. And those are a little more outwardly political than these are. But when you consider the subject and what he's talking about, what he's referring to in history, they are very political in nature. So we've put these in order as they are found on the Zodiac, the Chinese Zodiac fable, I guess, story about the race. I like story because story is attached to history, and that's another thing, that the Zodiac heads are significant in Chinese history. And I've worked with a lot of storytelling and art, and what the stories tell are important, and they're all based in fact. This story is a pretty good one. It's not necessarily what the art is about, But Lisa's going to tell you the order that we found. What we found was a lot of different regions have different stories for the origin of the Chinese zodiac. And so this is sort of a generic one that we put together about how they got in this order. So this is the hierarchy of the animals in the zodiac head. Take it away, Lisa.
Yeah, so the story is really wonderful. And as Tammy said, there are many different variations depending on what region you're in the East. And there are different versions. So it starts, and well, first I should say that the zodiac system itself was in place likely before the story came about. So for thousands of years, this has been the case. And there are Neolithic tomb burials in China that depict some or all of the zodiac animals, either in murals on the ceiling of the tomb or in ceramic figures surrounding the burial. So there's evidence of this from very early on, depicting the cycles of time and harvest, etc. So this story starts with a supernatural being. Everyone agrees it's a supernatural being. Some people think it's the Buddha. Some stories say it's the Jade Emperor, which has a very has high rank in the deities of China. Some say it's the Yellow Emperor. Regardless, it's a supernatural being who called a great race of 13 animals. Now, there are only 12 animals of the zodiac. And I should say that the zodiac system in China is based on a lunar cycle of 12 years, whereas the zodiac system of Western zodiac system that we're used to is a solar calendar that is only 1 year. So there are differences. So there are 13 animals. There was a cat. And you'll notice as you walk down, there is no cat in the zodiac system. So the cat and the rat were very close friends to begin with. And they started the race off together. And the story goes, a component of the race is that all these animals had to cross this raging river to get to the other side. Some say it was the gates of heaven on the other side. Some say it was the Jade Emperor's palace. Regardless, they had to cross this river. So the cat and the rat get to the edge of the river, looking around. They can't swim very well. And they see the mighty ox plowing through the river. And so they both jump on the back of the ox. Right before they get to the other side, the maybe conniving, sneaky, very intelligent rat pushes the cat off into the river, so it does not finish the race. And as Tammy said, Ai Weiwei himself had 40 cats, and Andy Warhol had 25. So the cat is a big theme here, even though you don't see them. So the cat never finishes the race, and right before they get to the finish line, the rat jumps off the ox's back to cross the finish line, even though the ox did help him get across. So the rat is first, then the ox. The tiger comes third, very strong creature, braving the currents, gets around third. And before I go on, I'm curious, how many people here know their zodiac, Western zodiac sign? Yeah, quite a few of you. So you know that whether you believe in that or not, I mean, there are still many people today who have their charts read and do believe in this system. You know that there are physical and traits just behavioral traits that are related to each zodiac sign. And so the traits of the animals as they finish this race are related to that. So then we have the rabbit who was hopping from log to log and was about to drown. He couldn't get to the end when a mighty gust of wind pushes him to the finish line. And that mighty gust of wind came from the dragon. The Chinese dragon is not like the dragon Smaug from Lord of the Rings. It's a benevolent and very helpful, intelligent, auspicious being, essentially. And so the dragon heard calls from help from a nearby village. They needed rain. Some stories say there was a fire in the village. So the dragon first helps the village, either gives them rain or puts out the fire, comes back, sees the rabbit who needs help, blows him to the other side, and then he crosses. Interestingly, Andy Warhol's sign is a dragon. So, and Ai Weiwei is a rooster. So the rabbit gets across, the dragon gets across, the snake wraps itself around the leg of the horse, and right before the finish line startles the horse, who steps back, and the snake is then able to cross. The horse crosses next. The ram, the monkey, and the rooster all work together on a raft to get across. They're beings that work well in groups. I'm a rooster, so I can attest to that. And then you have at the very end, oh, there's the dog. So dog owners know most dogs love to play in water. So this dog is no different in the Chinese zodiac. It splashes and plays in the water so long that it almost doesn't finish the race. And then it realizes, oh, okay, I need to go. So he finishes. And then very last is the pig, who ate a really big meal and then took a nap, woke up just in time to finish last. So the story is really wonderful. And as Tammy said, there are many different variations. And Ai Weiwei, you know, it is not about that story, but the zodiac itself, it's nice to know that that is an associated story for that tradition.
And so you can see there's attributes to the animals, attached to the animals. Like, I know I'm a rabbit and I'm going to be hopping from thing to thing, not quite knowing which way to go. And I need to get by with a little help from my friend at the end. But what both of these artists, and I can't stress this enough, is considering animals and the value, and as we do here at the National Wildlife Museum, consider how we think about animals, how we relate to this ever-changing relationship that humans have with the natural world. Like I said in the last exhibit, we're living in the Anthropocene right now. This is a epoch that is influenced largely by humans being here and what we do. So by looking at this, we can understand better that we need to pay more attention to that relationship, I hope, and that only good will come of it. So I hope you enjoy this exhibit and become inspired, maybe to do your own Lego creation, because we're going to have a Lego, it's not set up yet today, but we're going to have
it's
a
set
Lego
up.
educational.
Tammy.
Very popular.
It's coming? It's open.
It's
Oh,
open.
I'm sorry.
I got it done this
I didn't know
morning.
it was open today. It's open, so you can design. Maybe make a copy, I'm not saying anything, your own Lego artwork. So, thank you everyone.
Thank you.